One son grew up watching his dad get shot outside their apartment building. The other was abandoned by his father for 5 years. The man who sang All You Need Is Love had two sons, but their childhood stories reveal a far more complicated reality than the peace and love anthem suggested. But what actually happened to John Lennon's two children? Lennon had two sons from two very different relationships, Julian with his first wife Cynthia and Shawn with Yoko Ono. How did these two boys navigate life in the shadow of one of music's most iconic figures, facing abandonment, tragedy, and the burden of an impossible legacy? Julian Charles John Lennon was born on April 8, 1963, in Liverpool, England, to John Lennon and Cynthia Powell. His birth came at the height of Beatlemania, when his father was becoming one of the most famous people on Earth. Yet Julian's early years were marked by absence, confusion, and the gradual realization that his father's love for music, and later Yoko Ono, would always come before his love for his firstborn son. Julian's childhood was shaped by his father's increasing absence. During the Beatles' touring years, John was rarely home, leaving Cynthia to raise Julian largely as a single mother. When John was present, he was often distracted, consumed by his music and the pressures of fame. Julian later recalled feeling like a stranger in his own home when his father returned from tours, describing how John seemed uncomfortable with the domestic routine and eager to escape back to his creative world. The most traumatic period of Julian's childhood began in 1968, when his father began his affair with Yoko Ono. Julian was just 5 years old when he witnessed his parents' marriage crumbling. He later described the confusion and pain of watching his father become obsessed with another woman, often bringing Yoko to the family home and making little effort to hide their relationship from his young son. When John and Cynthia divorced in 1968, Julian's world was turned upside down. His father's departure wasn't just physical, it was emotional and financial as well. John seemed to view his old life, including his son, as obstacles to his new artistic and personal journey with Yoko. Julian later said, "I felt like I was being erased from his life, like I was an inconvenience that reminded him of a past he wanted to forget." The abandonment became even more pronounced when John and Yoko moved to New York in 1971. Julian was 8 years old and living with his mother in England, seeing his father perhaps once or twice a year. Phone calls were infrequent, and when they did occur, they were often awkward and brief. Julian would later describe these rare conversations as feeling like he was talking to a stranger who happened to share his last name. Julian's education took place at various schools in England, where he struggled with the weight of his father's fame. Teachers and classmates treated him differently, either with excessive reverence or cruel teasing about his father's controversial statements and behavior. Julian found solace in art and music, but was initially reluctant to pursue these interests professionally, knowing the inevitable comparisons to his father would be overwhelming. The birth of Shawn Lennon in 1975 added another layer of complexity to Julian's relationship with his father. John's decision to become a house husband for Shawn while continuing to neglect Julian created a painful contrast that Julian struggled to understand. He later reflected, "I watched from across the ocean as my father became the devoted dad to Shawn that I had always wanted him to be for me." Despite the pain of his father's neglect, Julian began developing his own musical talents in his teens. He learned to play guitar and piano, wrote songs, and discovered he had inherited his father's melodic sensibilities. However, his musical journey was complicated by constant comparisons to John and the pressure to either follow in his footsteps or completely reject his legacy. Julian's relationship with his father remained strained throughout John's life. Their last significant interaction occurred in 1980, just months before John's death. Julian had traveled to New York with hopes of reconciling with his father, but the visit was reportedly awkward and unresolved. John seemed uncomfortable with Julian's presence and eager to return to his routine with Yoko and Shawn. The tragic irony of Julian's story became apparent after John's assassination in December 1980. Julian was 17 years old when he lost his father permanently, just as he was reaching an age where a real adult relationship might have been possible. The world mourned John Lennon as a peace activist and musical genius, But Julian mourned the father who had never truly been present in his life. Julian's musical career began in earnest in the mid-1980s with his debut album, Valote. The album was both a commercial success and a personal statement, featuring songs that dealt with his complex feelings about his father and his own identity. His voice bore an uncanny resemblance to John's, which brought both opportunities and challenges. Critics and fans couldn't help but compare him to his father, making it difficult for Julian to establish his own artistic identity. Throughout his career, Julian has released several albums and maintained a steady presence in the music industry, though he has never achieved the commercial success of his father. His music often deals with themes of abandonment, forgiveness, and the search for identity, clearly influenced by his experiences as John Lennon's neglected son. Julian's personal life has been marked by a desire for privacy and normalcy that his father never provided. He has been in several long-term relationships, but has chosen not to have children, stating that he doesn't want to risk passing on the cycle of abandonment he experienced. This decision reflects the deep impact his father's neglect had on his understanding of family and responsibility. In recent years, Julian has become more open about his relationship with his father, participating in documentaries and interviews that explore their complicated dynamic. He has also developed a cordial relationship with Yoko Ono and his half-brother Shawn, though it took decades for these relationships to heal from the wounds of the past. Shawn Ono Lennon was born on October 9, 1975 in New York City, sharing his birthday with his father John Lennon. This coincidence seemed to seal Shawn's fate as the chosen son, the child who would receive the love and attention that had been denied to Julian. Shawn's birth marked the beginning of John's 5-year retreat from public life, during which he devoted himself to being a house husband and raising his second son. Shawn's early childhood was dramatically different from Julian's experience. John was present, attentive, and deeply involved in every aspect of Shawn's upbringing. He changed diapers, prepared meals, and took Shawn to Central Park almost daily. This hands-on approach to parenting was revolutionary for John, who had been largely absent during Julian's early years. The Dakota apartment where Shawn grew up became a cocoon of creativity and privilege. John would often play music for Shawn, teaching him about different instruments and musical styles. Shawn's musical education began almost from birth, with John singing to him and encouraging his early attempts at playing piano and guitar. Unlike Julian, who had to discover his musical talents largely on his own, Shawn was immersed in music from his earliest memories. Shawn's relationship with his father was intimate and complex. John treated him as both a beloved son and a kind of artistic collaborator. They would spend hours together in John's home studio, with Shawn observing and sometimes participating in his father's creative process. John often spoke about Shawn in interviews during this period, describing him as his greatest achievement and the reason he had stepped away from his musical career. The protective bubble around Shawn's childhood was shattered on December 8, 1980, when he was just 5 years old. That night, Shawn was at home with his mother Yoko when John was shot and killed outside their apartment building. The trauma of losing his father in such a violent and public way would shape Shawn's entire life, creating a complex relationship with his father's legacy and his own identity. Shawn's memories of his father are both precious and painful. He recalls John as a loving, present father who made him feel like the center of the universe. But he also carries the weight of being the son for whom John gave up his career, creating a sense of responsibility and guilt that has followed him throughout his life. After John's death, Shawn's childhood became even more sheltered. Yoko was determined to protect him from the media attention and the darker aspects of his father's legacy. He was enrolled in exclusive private schools and surrounded by security, creating a gilded cage that protected him but also isolated him from normal childhood experiences. Shawn's education was unconventional and privileged. He attended various elite schools in New York, where his famous parentage made him both a target of curiosity and a figure of reverence. Teachers and classmates often treated him differently, either with excessive deference or inappropriate familiarity. Shawn struggled with the weight of expectations and the constant reminders of his father's fame. Despite the trauma of his father's death, Shawn's musical talents emerged early and were nurtured by his mother and the musicians who remained close to the family. He learned to play multiple instruments and began writing songs as a teenager, displaying a natural talent that seemed to validate his father's belief in his potential. Shawn's relationship with his half-brother Julian was complicated by the circumstances of their upbringing. While Julian had been neglected by their father, Shawn had been the center of John's world. This created a dynamic where Shawn carried guilt about receiving the love that Julian had been denied, while Julian struggled with resentment about their father's different treatment of his two sons. As Shawn entered his teens, he began to rebel against the protective environment his mother had created. He experimented with drugs, got into trouble at school, and seemed to be acting out the adolescent rebellion that his father's death had interrupted. Yoko struggled to balance protecting Shawn with allowing him to develop his own identity. Shawn's musical career began in earnest in the late 1990s with his band IMA. The group's experimental sound reflected Shawn's desire to create something different from his father's legacy, while still honoring his musical heritage. The band received critical acclaim, but limited commercial success, establishing Shawn as a serious artist in his own right. Throughout his career, Shawn has worked to establish his own artistic identity while dealing with the inevitable comparisons to his father. His music is more experimental and eclectic than John's, incorporating elements of electronic music, jazz, and world music. He has collaborated with a wide range of artists and has been respected for his innovative approach to music making. Shawn's personal life has been marked by the same desire for privacy that characterized his childhood. He has been in several long-term relationships and has been open about his struggles with depression and anxiety, likely stemming from the trauma of his father's death and the pressure of living up to his legacy. Thanks for watching. Click here to check another video and make sure to subscribe to our channel.